Every prom night tells a story, but in 1976, Brian De Palma painted One in Blood, creating cinema's most devastating portrait of terror and tragedy. This is the story of Carrie White, a tale where teenage dreams would be drowned in red, where a mother's love turns poisonous, and where one girl's night of triumph becomes a canvas for unspeakable horror. But before the blood falls, before the screams begin, we need to understand how a simple high school prom becomes one of film history's most heartbreaking catastrophes.
Tell that boy you're not going or we're going to move from here. No. You'll move from here and you'll never see that boy again. Lorraine's coming in.
Mom, please sit and talk to me.
Let it close the window.
Mama, I'll get him. Please sit and talk to me.
At its heart, Carrie is the story of a teenage girl who wants what every teenager wants: to be normal, to fit in, to be accepted. Carrie White is a shy 16-year-old living with her fanatically religious mother in a small town. Isolated and bullied at school, controlled and abused at home. Carrie discovers she possesses powerful telekinetic abilities.
Sit down and be quiet.
When a cruel prank at her senior prom pushes her too far, these powers transform from a source of private strength into instruments of devastating revenge. Stephen King wrote Carrie while living in a trailer and teaching high school English, drawing from his observations of teenage social dynamics. It was his first published novel, and its unique structure, alternating between traditional narrative and documentary elements like newspaper clippings and scientific studies, created a sense of inevitable doom. King drew inspiration from two isolated female students he remembered from his own high school days, combining their stories with his observations of teenage social hierarchies. Screenwriter Lawrence D. Cohen faced the challenge of adapting King's complex narrative for the screen. His three crucial changes reshaped the story. Abandon the documentary framework for a linear narrative that heightens emotional impact. Reduce the scope of destruction from the entire town to the more intimate prom setting. Streamlined Sue Snell's story to maintain focus on Carrie's tragedy. The path to assembling this devastating ensemble nearly took several different turns. Brian De Palma had initially selected Betsy Slade for the title role, believing he'd found his perfect Carrie White. The role was essentially hers, until Sissy Spacek demanded an audition. At the time, Spacek was only being considered for Chris Hargensen, the film's cruel antagonist. It was her husband, art director Jack Fisk, who fought for her to have a chance at the lead role. For her screen test, Spacek made a decision that would change cinema history. She appeared wearing an old sailor dress from her own childhood, her hair pulled back severely, no makeup, and carrying a stack of books clutched to her chest. The moment she walked in, De Palma knew he had to reconsider everything.
I think that I felt so used and abused at that point because I knew Brian, I was not his favorite. And that worked for me. I just decided I was gonna get it.
The casting process intersected fascinatingly with another 1976 project that would change cinema forever. De Palma shared casting sessions with George Lucas, who was simultaneously casting for Star Wars. Both directors saw many of the same young actors.
George and I are both looking for unknowns. So we sat together and basically went through hundreds of boys and girls looking for the cast for Carrie and Star Wars.
Sissy Spacek and Amy Irving both auditioned for Princess Leia. William Catt, Tommy Ross, was considered for Luke Skywalker. Nancy Allen read for both films. Spacek's commitment to the role was total. She isolated herself from the cast during filming, decorated her dressing room like Carrie's bedroom, wore the same clothes to set daily, slept in her bloody prom dress for 3 days, insisted on being pulled underground for the final grave scene. This dedication would earn her an Oscar nomination for Best Actress, a rare recognition for a horror film performance. Piper Laurie emerged from a 15-year retirement to play Margaret White, initially thinking the script was a comedy due to its extreme elements. Her portrayal of Margaret's religious mania brought frightening depth to what could have been a one-note character, earning her an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress.
A wonderful woman who had been my agent years before in New York City called and said, I have a script here. I'm going to set it up and read it. So I did, and I thought it was sort of a cliche part, and I didn't get it. And I was talking to my husband that evening, and I said, no. He said, well, you know, Brian De Palma has a comedic approach to just about everything he does. And I thought, oh, that's the secret. I didn't read it properly. So I reread it, and I thought, oh, this is a satire.
The fact that both Spacek and Laurie were nominated for their roles in a horror movie was unique for its time. John Travolta made his film debut as Billy Nolan a year before Saturday Night Fever would make him a star. His dangerous charm brought casual cruelty to what could have been a simple thug role. Nancy Allen captured the entitled vindictiveness of Chris Hargensen.
The funny thing is that whenever John and I worked together on the movie, we just thought we were very funny. I had no idea we were such villains until I saw the movie. We were like the comic relief on the set, you know?
While William Catt brought genuine kindness to Tommy Ross. Betty Buckley portrayed the sympathetic gym teacher, Miss Collins.
He called me one day and he said he'd like to take me to dinner. And he gave me the book, Carrie. He said, this is going to be my next movie, and I want you to play the part of the gym teacher. So I read the book, and it was this teeny part. And then a few months later, they sent me the script, and he had actually incorporated the part of the principal with the gym teacher, so that it was a fabulous part. It was a wonderful debut part in a movie.
Amy Irving completed the ensemble as Sue Snell, becoming the audience's witness to the unfolding tragedy.
I had never made a film before, and I was doing a production of Romeo and Juliet on the stage when this audition came up for Star Wars. And everybody in town was going in on this. And Brian De Palma was sitting in the corner of all the interviews that George was giving. And he was kind of like making his little mental notes to say, okay, George can only pick so many, you know, I'll see what's left.
Watch Chris and Billy's scenes together. What looks like a teenage romance reveals itself as something far more sinister. Chris Hargensen, the privileged popular girl, believes she controls Billy through her sexuality. Billy Nolan lets her believe this, while maintaining his own brutal dominance. But who's really controlling who? Their dynamic reaches its darkest at the pig farm. The killing of the pig becomes foreplay, the blood a prelude to their own violent end. But why does this toxic alliance matter so much to our story? Because it shows us what happens when evil finds its perfect partner. If Chris and Billy's relationship is toxic, what awaits us in the White household paints an even darker portrait. Margaret White's twisted version of faith transforms every natural impulse into sin, every joy into shame. Yet something haunts Margaret, a secret that will explain what happened the night Carrie was conceived.
I saw him looking down at me that way.
I liked it, she whispers, her voice filled with both shame and ecstasy. But this confession illustrates Margaret's struggle with her own dark belief system, that engaging in a carnal act is somehow wrong, especially when her daughter was created through that act. Consider the moment Carrie tries on her prom dress, when Margaret can't even say the word breasts, instead calls them dirty pillows.
I can see your dirty pillows.
We see how language itself has been corrupted. When we move to the prom, De Palma begins laying his trap early. Each element is precisely placed. The ropes, the bucket, the blood. But while we watch these preparations, something else is happening. Carrie's starting to change. Her posture straightens. She begins to hope. And that's when we realize, why is De Palma making us believe in the possibility of happiness when we know what's coming? Pino Donaggio's score begins its delicate dance, transforming what could have been simple horror into tragic opera. Watch how every element conspires to create hope. The lighting softens. The camera movements become fluid. The music swells with promise. But while Carrie experiences her moment of triumph, De Palma is orchestrating something else entirely. Above the gymnasium, another performance is about to begin. Notice how precisely De Palma constructs his trap. The camera follows the rope's path like a snake through the rafters, each pulley and turn bringing us closer to catastrophe. But it's not just about the mechanics. Watch Nancy Allen's face as Chris prepares to pull the rope. The almost sexual anticipation on Chris's face, knowing when she's about to do. The sequence builds through multiple perspectives. Carrie and Tommy basking in triumph on stage. Sue desperately trying to prevent what's coming. Chris and Billy waiting under the stage. Because what happens next isn't just about blood and humiliation. It's about transformation. The crowd's actual reaction is mixed. Horror, shock, scattered nervous laughter. But through Carrie's eyes, filtered through years of maternal manipulation, something else entirely is unleashed. They're all going to laugh at you. Her mother's words become a cruel reality. What we're seeing is revenge as a dark work of art. As Carrie stands on the stage, blood-soaked and almost still, De Palma uses Gustave Moreau's haunting painting of Lady Macbeth as inspiration for this scene. It's no accident that both women stand suspended in moments of violent transformation, their pale gowns stained crimson, their poses suggesting both power and devastation. De Palma choreographs the carnage like a dance. Doors slam shut, trapping everyone inside. Fire hoses writhe like serpents. Electrical cables become instruments of death. The basketball court transforms into a killing field. In this symphony of destruction, something else is happening. With each death, with each act of violence, Carrie isn't becoming stronger. She's becoming a vessel of vengeance. What started as a girl's desperate defense is turning into a prophecy fulfilled. As Carrie walks through the burning town, blood-soaked and barefoot, De Palma captures her journey like a twisted pilgrimage. After the carnage, she still seeks out her cruelest abuser for comfort. Here's the moment that breaks hearts and underlines the tragedy of this supernatural tale. As Carrie enters her house, all the power, all the destruction falls away. What we see instead is something far more devastating, just a frightened teenager who wants her mother. But why does De Palma make Margaret seem so maternal in this moment? What makes this final betrayal so much worse than anything that's come before? The cruel irony unfolds like a Renaissance painting. Mother and daughter bathed in candlelight, the promise of comfort turned to ultimate betrayal. Her mother, believing her daughter is a witch, has to deceive her to commit her final act, hugging her before plunging a knife into her. As Carrie falls down the stairs and tries to escape, Margaret raises her knife again, and in this moment, we know who the real monster is. The death of Carrie's mother becomes a religious moment. Margaret makes the sign of the cross with the knife, her face showing ecstatic pleasure in her holy duty. She sees herself not as a murderer, but as a savior. Each stab is like a blessing to her. Carrie's response is pure tragic instinct. Her powers are a primal defense mechanism, sending kitchen utensils flying. The pose of Saint Sebastian in her prayer closet is emulated now. Knives and kitchen implements pin Margaret to the wall, her arms spread almost like a cross, her face showing religious ecstasy as she dies, finally freed from her mortal coil, crossing over to meet her maker and savior. But the true heartbreak comes in Carrie's reaction. Even after this final betrayal, she cradles her mother's body. In death, she can finally embrace Margaret without fear. As the house begins to collapse around them, Carrie doesn't try to save herself. Terrified, she simply holds her mother, making up for all the embraces they never shared as her life is extinguished. When we think the tragedy has ended, De Palma delivers one of cinema's most innovative sequences. He filmed Amy Irving walking backwards. From Carrie's grave and reversing the footage, he creates something unnaturally beautiful. What makes this simple technique so effectively disturbing? Sue's movements appear fluid, yet wrong. Her dress and hair move against physics. Every step is dreamlike. The bright light seems almost too perfect. Then comes that hand, Carrie's arm exploding from the earth. The peaceful reverse motion shatters into normal time. Donaggio's score delivers its shocking stab, and Sue's scream brings us crashing back to reality, being held by her mother. Carrie transcended its genre trappings, earning both critical acclaim and audience devotion. The Oscar nominations for Spacek and Laurie validated horror as a vehicle for serious acting. But perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that the most devastating monsters aren't born of hell or science gone wrong. They're created by ordinary people and the cruel acts they commit. The final dream sequence suggests that the tragedy of Carrie White isn't just her own. It was a societal failure that aided the school's destruction. Her story resonates because it speaks to universal fears of rejection, isolation, and the terrible consequences of cruelty. In the end, this prom night painted in blood becomes a portrait of human tragedy, where every stroke of violence may expose something about ourselves.
I pray you find Jesus.